What's up, Crunch fam? Welcome back for another deep dive. And I got to say, this one's a little heavier than usual. This one's dealing with some serious allegations against some pretty major figures in the music industry.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We're unpacking a case with some really huge implications. Raises a lot of questions about power, accountability, and really the complexities of the legal system.
Yeah, we're talking about a woman identified as Jane Doe and her lawsuit against both Jay-Z and Sean Diddy Combs. She's alleging that they raped her at a VMA's after party back in 2000, and she was just 13 years old at the time. So we've got her account, we've got strong denials coming from both Jay-Z and Diddy, and we've got legal actions in motion. A lot to sort through.
Absolutely. It really is a situation where every single detail matters. And, our goal here is to kind of help everyone understand all the little nuances here. We're going to examine the accusations. We're going to look at the responses and the legal strategy that each side is using. And we'll try to understand what it all means in a larger context.
Yeah. All right. So let's just dive right in. Let's start with the Jane Doe's account. What exactly is she alleging happened that night?
Okay, so Doe claims that she was given a drink at this after party by a cocktail waitress. And then she started feeling disoriented, like she wasn't quite right. And she went to lie down in a bedroom. And that's where, according to her lawsuit, Jay-Z, Diddy, and another woman that hasn't been identified entered the room. And Doe alleges that both Jay-Z and Diddy raped her.
This is a very heavy accusation, especially considering her age at the time. She's 38 now, and she's saying she felt powerless to speak out for all these years because of their celebrity status. But here's something I find interesting. Doe herself is acknowledging some inconsistencies in her initial telling of the events.
Yeah, and those inconsistencies are really crucial to understanding this whole thing. For example, she initially stated that her father picked her up after the alleged assault, but her father says he doesn't remember doing that. And she also claimed to have spoken to a specific celebrity at the party, but that person has said they weren't even in New York at the time.
Right, so how's Doe's legal team, specifically her lawyer, Tony Busby, how is he addressing these inconsistencies?
Well, Busby is maintaining that Doe's core accusations are true. He's pointing to her willingness to take a polygraph test and the extreme emotional distress that she's been going through, which includes seizures. He's using this as evidence of the trauma she says she endured. This is a pretty common strategy, actually, to kind of highlight the psychological impact to make the accusations seem more credible.
Okay, so we've heard Doe's side of the story. What about Jay-Z and Diddy? How are they responding to these serious allegations?
Yeah, they both have issued very strong denials. Jay-Z in particular has taken a really aggressive approach. He's called the lawsuit a shameful money grab and even referred to Busby as a 1-800 lawyer, implying that he's just after a quick payout.
So it sounds like a very calculated strategy to discredit both the lawyer himself and, by extension, the accusations.
Exactly. It's a tactic that's meant to shift the whole narrative away from the accusations. Jay-Z has actually stated that the case is over before it began, and that he intends to expose Busby's alleged fraudulent behavior. So it seems like he's preparing for a full-on legal battle.
And what about Diddy? Has he released any statement regarding these allegations?
Yes, Diddy has also denied the allegations, but his response has been less vocal than Jay-Z's. It could be a strategic decision, letting Jay-Z kind of take the lead in the public response for now.
So we've got two very different narratives starting to emerge here. Where do things stand with the actual legal proceedings?
Well, Jay-Z's legal team has filed a motion to dismiss the whole lawsuit. They're claiming that it's nothing more than an extortionate campaign to force a settlement, basically arguing that Doe and Busby are just trying to pressure him into a payout, regardless of what actually happened. It's a pretty bold move, and legally it all hinges on proving that there isn't enough evidence or legal standing for the case to even proceed.
And to add even more complexity to this, Jeezy's lawyer has requested that Doe's anonymity be revoked, meaning her full name would become public knowledge. That's a very aggressive move, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It is. This tactic is sometimes used to try to discourage people, accusers from continuing with the lawsuit. The idea is that the potential loss of privacy and all the intense scrutiny that would come with that might make someone, reconsider, especially when it's such a sensitive topic like this.
This just adds another layer to the media frenzy surrounding this case, right? I mean, this isn't just happening in a courtroom. This is all playing out in the public eye.
Oh, it absolutely is. The media coverage has been intense, lots of speculation and opinions flying around. Remember, Crunch fam, our goal here is to cut through all that noise and help you understand what's really at stake here. So before we move on, I have a question for you to consider. What strikes you as the most significant aspect of this case so far?
Hold that thought. We'll be back after a short break to delve deeper into the legal strategies and explore the broader implications of this whole case. Don't forget to like, comment, share, follow, and subscribe. We'll see you part 2.
See ya. This whole case just brings up so many questions about how challenging it can be to seek justice when you're making accusations against these really powerful figures.
You're right. I mean, there's often this sense of disbelief,
Yeah.
when someone accuses a celebrity of wrongdoing,
Yeah.
especially when the accusations are this serious. How do you see that dynamic playing out in this particular case?
I think it's just crucial to remember that public perception doesn't dictate legal outcomes. So while Jay-Z's celebrity status, it obviously influences how the media covers this and how the public thinks about it. But the court, they have to base their decisions on evidence and the legal arguments that are being presented.
Yeah, it's a good reminder for all of us, Crunch fam, to be really careful about forming our opinions based solely on someone's fame or their reputation.
Absolutely. I think we have to allow the legal process to play out and avoid, contributing to narratives that could potentially be really harmful.
And speaking of that legal process, let's take a closer look at the strategies that both sides are using. We're talking about how Jay-Z's legal team is pushing for a dismissal. Can you kind of break down their arguments for us?
Sure. So their main argument is that this lawsuit lacks merit and that it's basically an extortionate campaign. And to kind of support that, they're pointing to the inconsistencies in Doe's account and suggesting that she and Busby are more interested in getting a financial settlement than they are in actual justice. And they're also bringing up Busby's history of filing lawsuits against Diddy, which they claim supports their argument of a financial motive.
So essentially, they're trying to paint a picture of Busby as someone who might be exploiting the system for his own personal gain. That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is. But it's important to note that this is actually a fairly common legal strategy, especially when you're defending a high-profile client. By casting doubt on the accuser and their lawyer's motivations, the defense is trying to weaken the overall credibility of the whole case.
But how does Busby counter those arguments? I mean, how does he defend his own reputation and the validity of Doe's claims?
Well, he's focusing on Doe's willingness to undergo that polygraph test, which, while it's not admissible in court, it can be presented as a way to demonstrate her confidence in her accusations. And he's also really emphasizing the extreme emotional distress that Doe says she's going through, arguing that it lines up with the trauma of sexual assault. This is another tactic that's often used in these types of cases because it creates that link between the alleged event and the psychological impact on the accuser.
So it seems like both sides are presenting their own interpretations of what happened and trying to build a narrative that supports their side. But we're only seeing this tiny part of the legal battle play out in public, right?
Exactly. There's likely a ton of behind-the-scenes negotiations, legal filings, and strategic decisions that we're not privy to. What we're seeing in the news is just one small piece of a much bigger puzzle.
This whole thing has definitely sparked a much larger conversation about how we deal with sexual assault allegations, especially when they involve people with power and influence.
It's true. This case really forces us to consider the power dynamics between the person making the accusations and the person being accused, and how the media plays a role in shaping public opinion, and how difficult it is to seek justice in a system that can often feel really biased.
And even beyond the legal outcome of this case, it brings up the question of what the impact of these types of accusations are on everyone involved.
You're absolutely right. Doe has spoken very openly about the emotional toll this is taking on her, the distress, the seizures she's been having. And, on the other side, you have Jay-Z's reputation and his career on the line.
It's a good reminder that these aren't just, abstract legal battles. These are real people, and the consequences for all parties involved can be devastating.
Absolutely. And, this brings us to another really important point. Jay-Z's legal team is also trying to paint this picture of Doe's lawyer, Tony Busby, as someone with a history of using questionable legal tactics.
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit earlier. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. So they're highlighting his past lawsuits against Diddy, trying to imply that he has a pattern of targeting wealthy individuals. This strategy is really meant to undermine Busby's credibility and, by extension, Doe's case. And it raises that question, is this really about justice, or is there some kind of exploitation of the legal system happening here?
That's a really difficult question to answer, and one that ultimately the court will have to grapple with. What I find interesting, though, is that this case is also highlighting that legal tactic of requesting the revocation of an accuser's anonymity. Can you talk about the logic behind that kind of request?
Yeah, that's a controversial move. It's often seen as a way to intimidate and silence the person making the accusations. The defense might argue that it makes things more fair, ensures that both sides are subject to the same level of scrutiny. But critics say that it puts a much heavier burden on the accuser and could potentially expose them to more harassment or further trauma.
It's a tough balance to strike right. On one hand, you have this right to a fair trial and the presumption of innocence. But on the other hand, you have this need to protect the person making the accusations and encourage others to come forward without being afraid of what might happen to them.
Exactly. And that's a really important point of tension in cases like this. How do we make sure there's a fair and thorough investigation while also protecting the rights and well-being of everyone who's involved?
That's something we should all be thinking about, Crunch Fam. As we head into the final part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this. What do you think are the most important things to consider when you're trying to assess the credibility of accusations in a case like this? Keep that in mind as we continue our discussion. Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive. Starting from those initial accusations and denials and going all the way to the legal strategies that are being used by both sides.
Yeah, it's been a lot to process, and I think it's really important at this point to kind of step back and think about what this all means. What are the bigger implications of this case? Because it really does bring up these uncomfortable questions about power and accountability and how complicated it can be to find justice in a system that can feel incredibly daunting, especially if you're going up against someone who has a lot of influence.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this case has really ignited a much bigger conversation about how we as a society deal with these types of accusations, especially when there's such a huge power imbalance.
Right. Right. We can't ignore the fact that we're talking about two extremely powerful people in the music industry, and that context shapes everything about this story,
Right.
from the way it's covered in the media to the legal strategies that are being used.
And then you have the inconsistencies in Doe's account, which just make this already sensitive and complicated situation even more complex.
Those inconsistencies are a major sticking point. Doe's lawyer is saying they're because of the trauma and, memory isn't always perfect. But Jay-Z's team is arguing that they show a lack of credibility and maybe even that there's some kind of malicious intent behind this whole thing.
It is a reminder that memory, especially when we're talking about traumatic events, it's not always a perfect recording of what happened. But as people who are observing this case, how do we weigh those inconsistencies against the fact that Doe is very clearly experiencing real emotional distress? It's a tough question.
It really is. And it shows that we need to be careful and nuanced in how we approach these types of cases. We can't jump to conclusions based on little details. Instead, we have to look at all of the evidence, all of the legal arguments, and what might be motivating everyone involved.
And we also can't forget the impact that this case is having on everyone. Doe has talked about the toll it's taking on her emotionally, the anxiety, the seizures she's been having. And then you have Jay-Z, whose reputation and career are on the line. This isn't just some abstract legal battle. This is something that could change everyone's lives.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to that core issue. How do we create a system where accusations like this are taken seriously and handled with sensitivity, while also making sure that the process is fair and that everyone is innocent until proven guilty?
It's such a complex question. There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
And this case has definitely shown us just how challenging it is to navigate our current system and where some of the pitfalls are.
It's also made people really think about how the media influences public opinion. You have all this coverage and speculation and opinions flying around, and it creates this really charged atmosphere.
It's a reminder, Crunch Fam, that we all have a responsibility to approach this kind of situation with critical thinking and empathy. We need to be aware of our own biases, consider different perspectives, and not rush to judgment.
That's so important. At the end of the day, this case is about so much more than just the legal outcome. It's a reflection of things that are happening in society as a whole, the power dynamics, the challenges that people face when trying to seek justice. And it shows us that we need to keep having these conversations about sexual assault, and we need to be more nuanced and informed in how we approach this topic.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. How can we, individually and as a society, contribute to creating a culture where survivors feel empowered to come forward and where these accusations are handled with integrity, fairness, and a real commitment to finding out the truth? That's something for all of us to think about.
Absolutely.